again to talk about the upcoming EWC StarCraft 2 event. This time around, I'm going to be giving you my predictions on who I think is going to win, who's going to do well, maybe an underdog, and I don't know, maybe some talk about the race divisions. I don't know. But let's just go ahead and jump into it. I have already looked at this a little bit and talked about it on stream. So I've kind of organized my thoughts, but I see if I even remember what those thoughts were. Maybe I've changed in the last couple of days. We got the play-in stage first and foremost. It's going to be played right off the bat, and then we'll go into the groups. But Estrella versus Beyond, Lambo versus Hero Marine. I also did all my homework on a stream, so I saw the stats and who should be winning and whatnot. But we also did an Illegilac guess on like top 8, and I disagreed with only like one thing that they mentioned. But Estrella versus Beyond is favored, and I do think Beyond is going to win. Estrella sometimes shows up for offline tournaments, but one thing I also did check is the offline performances of all these players in the last 2 years. And again, Beyond is pretty favored to win. The matchup isn't particularly appealing, I suppose, right now, but yeah, I don't know. Estrella has a chance. I just think that Beyond is who I'm going to point out as the winner. Lambo, Hero Marine. Hero Marine also tends to come out on top, even though Lambo has time to prep. He has had time to prep against Hero Marine in previous tournaments. Not that often. They often meet, halfway into something, but it has happened. And generally, Hero Marine still comes out on top. So I do believe Hero Marine will take that game as well. Then Beyond wins against Hero Marine, and Beyond is the first to advance out of groups. Lambo and Estrella would face, and then I would think Lambo would win. I think his PVZ is very sharp right now. Estrella's is okay, but actually it might be worse than his PVT, depending on the day, I suppose. So unfortunately, I don't know if Estrella's really going to get that far. And then Lambo versus Hero Marine, another rematch. And again, I believe that Hero Marine would win. So I think Beyond and Hero Marine would advance on through, that Terran bias. And then I'm not sure how they're going to get placed. I guessed, but I don't know, which is that the lower bracket will face the highest seeded person, and that would be Clem. Clem won last year. So I think, if my guesses are going correctly, I think Hero Marine would then face Clem. Beyond would then face Cyril. So we're going to go along with that. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And what am I going to do? Clem, I believe, does win against Hero Marine. Do keep in mind that he is going to be playing Protoss versus Terran, not Terran versus Terran. You would have to have crammed in a lot of Terran versus Terran practice in secret in the last few weeks to have that change, because he's been playing nothing but Protoss versus Terran. But I think his Protoss versus Terran is quite good. I think he's been now doing it often enough in these high-profile matches that some of the awkwardness that we saw, for instance, in him versus Gumiho at Home Story Cup, I don't think exists as much anymore. So I do still have him as the winner in a PVT even. So he'll advance on. Solar Zound was actually super tight. Statistically, recently, offline performance-wise, they're very, very close to each other. I think I gave a slight edge to Zound, actually. And I think Illegilac even agreed with that. The robots are going to take over. So I'm just going to go with it, even though it's 50-50. It's a coin flip. So let's just say Clem versus Zound. And then Shin Raynor. I think Shin is going to win, actually. I think Shin has... So Shin technically had a little bit less good ZVZ if you're looking at percentages of the last 2 years. But he had... 60 more games played. It was 90 ZVZs versus 180, or I don't know, twice as much about. So I do think Shin is going to win versus Raynor, but it is very difficult to call ZVZs at this point because so much of it is about all-inning. And so it can kind of be a coin flippy matchup. But yeah, Shin's also just been kind of performing... at this point, it's not above his pay grade at this point. He actually has gotten to be a very consistent, round of 8er, maybe even a couple of round of 4s. So, yeah, I think everyone is looking at Raynor to make a really big splash again at a tournament, but he's kind of the one that has to prove himself, oddly enough. And then Trigger versus Maru, as much as I do love Trigger, and I think Protoss is having a good time, versus Terran, and well, perhaps more so Terran's having a bad time versus Protoss, whatever way you slice it. I do think that Morrow is still going to win. And then you would have Clem versus Zound. I think that's very, very difficult for Clem, but I am still going to call him as a victor. So I think he qualifies, and then I think Morrow versus Shin is actually the most one-sided matchup out of anyone here. Legitimately, I think even Hero Cyan is Cyan won a map or two. Well, not a map, but a series. Whereas Shin has, he's never won a series against Maru in like all of their history, and then he only wins like 30% of their maps, like something really, really low. So yeah, unless that just suddenly all of a sudden changes, Maru definitely qualifies. I was saying Clem versus Maru in the top half, and then for the lower half, I think I chose Solar and Zaun actually. I don't know how they would fall into the bracket, so I don't know if a rematch is possible. If it's not, then I give it to Rainer. But yeah, that kind of points as maybe here Marine not advancing and Trigger not advancing, and yeah, maybe some of the other ones. Group B, Hero versus Lancer against Cyan. I do think Hero overall does win, but it is a best of 3 to start these things off. So PvP, like the Protoss stylings of Cyan can sometimes be a little odd. There's a chance that he wins and causes an upset, and then it's just going to blow my whole bracket prediction apart. But for now, we'll just say Hero wins. Kira versus Showtime. The thing is that I kind of want to get this to Showtime. The only thing that's holding me back isn't necessarily their head-to-head, isn't the win records of both of them in their respective matchups. It is more so that Showtime often appears in a strong form in a tournament, and his downfall is often a Korean Terran. Even when his PVT looks good, even when the Korean Terran isn't like, the big top 4 or 3 or whatever it is, he does tend to falter. So he's really kind of, his problem, I feel like, in tournaments right now is really playing up to his potential at the time when he most needs it. And that does seem to affect a lot of his PVTs. So I am going to give this one to Cure. And then Cure versus Hero, I think that Hero does win. No problem, actually, whatsoever. So Hero qualifies. And then Classic Rogue is very close. Obviously, the GSL Finals is also very close. I'm going to give it to Classic. Classic looks really, 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 really good. But Rogue is tricky, man. Rogue is freaking tricky. And Rogue, he's kind of due to do the Rogue thing. After coming back from military, he hasn't been solid enough to do the Rogue thing, which is just suddenly win a tournament. And then like the next tournament, he would do poorly. But it doesn't matter. Point is, he would like just come in and win, right? That could happen. But I am going to give it to Classic. And then Cyril versus, again, Beyond. I think Beyond takes like a map. And then Cyril wins overall. And then Cyril versus Classic, that's a tough one to call. They also had a recent, very close series, and I'm not sure how much things have changed since then. We don't see a lot of Cyril. And, you don't see a lot of, Classic facing the caliber and the type of Zerg player that Cyril is. So, I don't know. Do I choose how impressed I am with Classic lately, or I just go full on, like, caster bias, as we all know we all have for Cyril. I'm just going to go with Classic to just, throw those people ready to pitchfork me off. Classic and Hero advance in the top. And then I do think Cyril qualifies alongside probably Rogue. Yeah, I think Rogue. So again, I don't really have a lot of faith, I suppose, in Lancer winning, Hero winning, or... Yeah, that's it, actually. Oh, and Beyond, sorry. Beyond, maybe, I guess. Nah, I'm going to stick with my guns. I think it'll be Rogue and Cyril, whoever the loser of Classic Cyril is, I guess. Moving on. I can't really... Yeah. I can't guess who's going to make it into the quarterfinals in what sequence. I could kind of guess based off of upper versus lower, but let's try and remember the 8 players that I even chose to begin with to qualify. I think the semifinals, okay, I did say this. I think the semifinals, I think the top 4 players are going to be Hero, Cyril, and Clem. I was like, I know it's one of each race. I think that's a very solid list because it was last year's top 4, and then Dark was also top 4 last year, and he's not here anymore. So I said actually in top 4, I believe it is going to be Classic. I do believe 2 Protoss are going to make it into the round of 4. Nothing goes wrong if I'm wrong. Do I believe that a Protoss is going to win? That is a different question. I think... Thing is, I don't think that Clem is favored to win any of the TVPs. If he ends up facing Cyril somehow, which is very possible, then I think he wins against Cyril and he's in the finals. But then there'd be a PvP in the other bracket, and then I don't know who would win that. But I don't again think, and then I guess that Protoss would win at that point if I'm following my own logic. But let's say that doesn't happen and it's Clem versus Protoss and Cyril versus Protoss. I do think Clem would lose, Cyril would win, and then I think Cyril wins against the Protoss, who's also in the grand final. But I'm not nearly as confident in that assessment as I was last year. Cyril was coming into EWC 24 as a incredibly dominant player, just crazy dominant. And if it wasn't for that young French guy, he would have dominated. His TVZ, ZVT for him stylings was perfected, unless you had a godlike micro and multitasking and aggression. And then his EVZ, well, I guess it wasn't tested as much, but it might not be tested all that much here either. And it's good. People always are like, it's the worst rate, it's its worst matchup. And it's like, well, technically, but it's still very, very high in the win record. And then his EVP is historically very good, even though Protoss has changed a bit in the last couple of months. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a safe enough bet because we also, similar to what I was talking about with Showtime and more about kind of the tournament like aura, the feeling that I get when he enters into these big tournaments. It's kind of the same thing with Protoss overall, I think, for much of the community, which is it's very easy to scoff at anyone who says Protoss will be champion because it's just like, well, when's the last time that happened? Huh? And it's like, that's kind of a fair point. Yes, they won GSL, but GSL is a shadow of its former self. And then they are the most represented as far as world championships goes, but as finalists, not necessarily as the victors of the finals. So, yeah, I mean, I do think I actually have a lot of faith in like multiple Protoss making it deep into this tournament. But I guess I am, along with a lot of other players, which is I don't necessarily believe they'll win the tournament. But happy to be wrong. Could be Hero, could be Classic is my guess. Not sure about the other Protoss causing such an upset. And then there you have it. I don't really care much about third place match. And I guess Clem, if he's not in the finals, is in the... I don't know. Doesn't matter. Point is, I said my piece. I think I said the most important things about the predictions. And that's where I will leave it. And people always ask, like who's the underdog, who's the dark horse, and the honest truth is just like there's not a lot of shakeup happening in StarCraft 2 in the top 16 players. And so I don't really think, obviously there are people who are very less likely to win. And if they win, that would be a complete surprise. I don't think anyone is set up for that. Same thing was said when Oliveira eventually ended up winning Katowice. But I really just, I think my picks are pretty logical and sound and pretty foolproof, honestly. As far as who makes it into the round of 8 with maybe like 1 or 2 surprises in the groups, but then not advancing too much farther beyond that. Did I do that right? I did that right. Yeah, because I kind of skipped the quarterfinals. So yeah. That's where I'm going to leave it. I don't really see anyone causing a huge upset or being a big surprise. People might be like, well, Zhao has been playing really well. Like, isn't him making the quarterfinals a big surprise? If that's what you consider a big surprise, sure. I guess that's it. But I don't know. I think a big surprise might be like Trigger making it to the round of 8. Or Showtime or Hero Marine, like the foreigners, I guess. But, it just seems very unlikely. Been wrong about that before, and I think we're all hoping for some action-packed StarCraft that has surprises in it, as far as the meta goes, as far as the results go, because that's I think needed in StarCraft 2 right now. What do you guys think? Am I completely wrong? I feel like my picks are actually extraordinarily safe, but maybe we got some passionate people out there. And other than that, make sure to actually watch. It's going to be July 22nd to July 25th. That is the Friday for the championships, guys. And the Twitch stream is going to be, again, just because it can be hard to find, on their main page, YouTube at EWC. And the A stream is down below. I'm just going to post it down below. It's too many words. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, and I hope you tune in to EWC. Bye-bye.